Today we talk about character death. So, you killed your first player character. You messed up. You don't know what to do anymore. And you're wondering if life can ever be the same. And I'm wondering that too. On today's episode of the What Is Tabletop podcast, where Frank is sitting in a chair backwards. Charles, take it from here, please.
Because he's cool. Hi, I'm Charles. I'm the second host of this channel. And yeah, let's get into it.
You're the second host of this channel? That's what you...
Yes, I'm the second host.
You could have said anything.
And I was second host. I panicked.
He's also wearing purple. These are things that happened.
These are the things we know to be true.
He's wearing purple, and there's a purple worm right there. So we're going to be talking about what happens after you've killed a PC, because let's be honest, the first time you do it is always by accident. But before we talk about that, like, comment, and subscribe. Help us to reach the goals that we want to reach and all of that fun stuff. And also, we want to beat Peter eventually. He keeps beating us, and I don't like it.
It's sad, guys.
Peter's a cool dude, actually. He did give us playtest material.
I love Peter.
Yeah, he's great. We really like you, Peter.
Be all friends. Be all friends.
Anyway, what are we talking about, Charles?
We are talking about killing PCs, actually, today. And how it happens and how you can respond to it.
I've been known for being the guy who kills a lot of players, and I'm not even the guy who's known for like running tough combats. That's Zach Brooks.
Yeah.
I'm known as the guy who somehow has killed way more players. Like I have Evan, for example. I've killed 5 of his characters, and that is baby numbers. There's my friend Zach Savory, who I've killed at least 10 of his characters.
You've killed what? If you include
4
Dread,
in the same campaign.
Yeah, if you include Dread, 1, 2, 3, 4, about 4 or 5 of my characters, I feel.
Like I said, baby numbers.
Yeah.
And then there's some people who I can't kill. Hannah, you will taste the sweet embrace of death one day. You will.
Your character, not you, Hannah.
Yes, I don't kill people. Anyway, I'm going to put this Chris knife away because it needs to draw blood. What are we talking about, Charlie?
Let's talk about what happens when you kill a player character. So what's going on in your mind, maybe what's going on at the table.
When it comes to PC death, it almost always happens when you don't necessarily expect it. Sometimes it'll happen in a climactic moment and it'll be like super fitting. And those moments are great. And if you have a role player, most of the time they're going to be okay with it. In fact, sometimes they might be like, that was the ending for my character. Do not bring my character back. Even if there's a means to in the RPG, do not, like, I want to bring a new character in. I want to tell a new story. Sometimes it's very fitting. Most of the time, here's what's going through my head. All right, and you take that much damage. Oh, I'm dead. No, you're not dead. You're dead. Cool. Okay, this challenge was too tough, and I'm going to have to adjust in the future.
So let's talk about permanence versus plot armor. So does death have to be permanent, or does your character? Do you have a plot armor that kind of protects your characters? Maybe even if it's not a forever type thing. Maybe protects them up to a certain level.
Yeah. So basically, this is a scale.
Yeah.
Is do our player characters never die, or do they die far too much?
Yeah.
And like it's like, what's even the point of having player character? Like, what's even the point of playing this game if they're going to die in one session? There is a fine line for both. I think if your characters never can die, what's even the point of rolling for dice? Like, your characters are just going to be like, they get to do everything they want eventually. So like, what does it matter?
Right.
Unless like part of the fun is like dungeon crawling, in which case there's some board games that you could play that give you the same feel. And yeah, it's less work on the GM's part, and they could be a player in it. So I would recommend that for those kinds of people. But then there's the, like I said, the like almost like meat grinder-esque scenario where, again, it's like, okay, yeah, I got to make my 5th character, even though it's only the 3rd session. Like, there's not as much fun to that. You want stakes in your game. You want your characters to feel like they could die. But at the same time, if they're beloved characters, like, you put a lot of effort into this, you don't want them to just die anticlimactically. You want there to be some sort of resolution to their character arc. Yeah,
I've talked to a couple of people recently. I was at a party over at Evans the other day and talked to people who play D&D. This guy, Nathan. Shout out to you, because I think he subscribed. Yeah. I think we were talking about, he had a recent combat experience where he almost died, but because there was a bit of plot armor, I mean, it was so close, but a bit of plot armor kind of saved him. Like he needed, like his character could not die at that moment. So it sounded like the GM kind of had something in place of it. And I agree with you. I think we need to have stakes when you're playing a game. Because, again, as a player, initially, like, the idea of losing a character that you spent some time on, it's kind of like, frustrating. It's like, I spent so much time on this character, now they're dead. But, again, for someone like me, I don't mind creating new characters. It's a fun task for me. And I think by that, your players should always be prepared for that, which I think brings me to our next question is, how do you prep your players for PC death?
I don't know. I mean, you let them know it's an option, but really the only way they know it's an option is when it happens. That is when the player characters are aware that death is on the table, is when you have the first death. I am of the opinion, and this is going to be a very interesting topic to see how people feel about it. I'm of the opinion your campaign isn't a true campaign until one player character dies before 5th level, because it shows the stakes. It shows how important things are. And like, does it suck? Yes. But again, it shows like, okay, there's death and it's possible. Like, it's really early to accidentally kill players early levels. I TPK'd the first session of a campaign one time. And if it wasn't for a Hail Mary play by one of my players saying like, praying to their God, and I'm like, okay, that's what we're rolling with. You're all going to die now. Like, I don't know what I would have done. Going back to your point about like player, like GM interference, I've definitely done that a few times where I'm like, okay, I can tell this character means a lot to this player. They've gone down. I'm not going to continue wailing on them. Instead, I'm going to go to this, this character, this monster, whatever, this villain was, oh, they're down? Cool. I'm going to go do this other thing. Conversely, I've had times where if it's really good role-play moment, right? This villain and this character have had beef and the character's down, the villain's going to end it because it's very thematic, right? I had a situation where we were playing a game in the Feywild, and one of Hannah's old characters was like, wants her to stay, and she's not willing to stay because she wants to be with the party. And so he's like attacking the party. He's like, you care about these people so much. Let me prove to you how fickle they are. And he killed Zach Dunkerton's character. And it was was able to do it, like last minute, killed him. They eventually defeated the villain and got home. Were able to revive Zach's character. But what was interesting is Zach's character and Hannah's character ended up in the game getting married. And so it was a retroactive, surprisingly fitting death, because it's like, oh yeah, he would have, oh, that's funny. It's like he wanted to go after the people that you cared about the most, and you ended up marrying that character. So that's really funny. But like, that's part of the fun of that. As a GM, I don't know, it's a tough thing. I don't think you can let your players know it's on the table until it happens, right? Were you aware it was on the table, Charles, as your first time playing?
So you, during session 0, it was addressed, like, my session 0, you addressed like characters can die. You were very clear, like, characters are going to die. Your character could die. You didn't specify when. And then again, my character didn't die real soon, but died.
Yeah, a few sessions in.
But like, I think we were 4 or 5 sessions in. My character had died, but actually before he had died, he was taken over by a what was it?
Yeah, like a mind reaver kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Which that's when I knew that we would get along really well. Is when I was like, okay, you died to this thing. I took Charles to the side and I was like, okay, your character's dead, but they're taking over by this thing. Are you fine with playing your character as they would normally go about things, just with the understanding that you're on the villain side? And you were like, yeah.
Yeah. Again, it's one of those things, like, that's when I think I figured out too. I was like, I'm more of a role player than I realized. So yeah, I was on board with that. But yeah, so I think it's important to at least let the players know ahead of time, like, it could happen. Not that it's going to happen, because again, like you said, lots of times you don't know it's going to happen until it happens.
Yeah.
Even the GM.
Yeah, I guess you could inadvertently have an NPC that the players really care about die, so it's showing what the stakes are. But again, I don't think it's the same.
I think there was like maybe 1 or 2 characters in our campaign that if something happened to them, which there's been a couple times they were on that like door, and I'm like, I was really concerned. But for the most part, I was more concerned about my my fellow player characters and myself, because it meant more to me that they survive than the NPC.
Yeah, there was a specific example where Brooks had talked to me outside of the game of, if my character ever went evil, by the way, here's what I'm capable of. And I'm like, cool, good to know. His character went evil, and we took care of that. I then created a scenario where I'm like, okay, he's going to be able to control 2 of the other players if needed. And so, but we're going to leave that to the will of the dice and to what the players' actions are. And basically what ended up happening was that exact scenario. But again, I wanted to, really like lean into the fact where I'm like, you guys are making a huge mistake by what you're doing, but you're all willing to attack him. Okay. More of you have to die now. And so Brooks's new character gets taken over by his old character, which is really funny. And he's like, okay, so I could kill this guy and this guy in one turn. And I'm like, no, do not kill Evan. He just brought in a new character. I'm not like he just rejoined the campaign, bringing this kid. No. But Charles did tell me he has, and that was the thing is like, I know how much you liked Ambrose.
Yeah.
But you also told me you had a backup character and you were interested to see how that would go. And I'm like, okay, I could pull Charles aside. I could say, let me find out. But from the previous interaction we had, I could tell like you were a story guy. And I'm like, okay, I think Charles will trust me on this. So I told Zach, you can kill Charles's character, but no one else. Maim, only kill Charles's character. Yeah. And so your character died. But then it brought forth your new character. True. And it was a very interesting story from there on out.
Yeah. I had an artificer whose kind of soul type thing got kind of infused into its
armor,
into its armor, which then became a warforged, but it had no recollection of who he was prior to that, so he kind of developed his own personality with it. So
super fun.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
And that character's still alive.
That character is still alive.
Despite having a very tragic ending, that character is still alive.
Yeah, very Bruce Banner.
A little bit.
Yeah. So let's talk about acknowledging, the players and their feelings, because again, there are some people who are just way too, like there are some GMs out there, we know they exist. They're just way too excited to kill off the player characters, and I don't think you should have that attitude. No. So, what's a good way of acknowledging, your players' feelings?
Understanding how attached your players are to characters. It's really just like being a good friend, and knowing like, okay, Charles is the kind of guy who's fine with character death. Zach Savory, like I said, killed 3 of his characters in one campaign. He learned very quickly how character death works, and so he gets like really peaceful about it. He loves playing the character. The second they die, he's like, okay. And they're like, well, we can try to bring your character back. And he's like, no, I want to play this new character. Like, this is actually a more interesting concept for me. Again, knowing how your player feels about it, right? Because you might have a player who's like, I actually want to play my new character more. And so the party's like, well, we're going to revive you anyway. And it's like, oh, okay, I guess you brought back my old character who I don't care too much about now because I want this new character out. That's one way to know about like your player's concern. There's another one. So in that same combat where your character died, I took over Jeffrey's character permanently. And part of me was like, Jeffrey, I'm warning you right now. I'm letting you know the stakes are extremely high. Your character will die if you continue down this path. And he's like, I don't care. And in that moment, I was like, I'm okay. I warned you. I give you ample things. And I took over Jeffrey's character and we met up to talk about his new character. And he was not happy. He was like, I actually don't want to play anymore. And I'm like, why? He's like, I only wanted to play that character. And so I had to learn like, okay, Jeffrey is the kind of person who he really just wants to play his one character. He doesn't want to like make a new thing. And so I'm like, okay, but I don't want to retroactively take back what happened, because I think that's actually more interesting, everything that happened with that. And so we had to come to a very interesting agreement where I'm like, I want you to play a new character. You don't want to play a new character. How do we compromise? You played a different version of the old character. And so I was like, we have rules for a revenant. So you're an undead now. And maybe your character's goal is to get his old body back. And then that's where like this idea came from. So he made a deal with basically like an evil entity. And they're like, sure, but you have to serve me if you do that. He's like, that's fine. I just want my old body back. She's like, I also want your old body back. So I had an evil entity who was along the same lines. It's just, by the way, once you fulfill your end of the bargain, you become part with me. So like, just know that that's what's going to happen. Right. And so Jeffrey got to keep playing his old character, even though he became blue. And we joked that the guy who, like, it was a Muppet campaign, and the guy who hated the Muppets the most became a Muppet.
So, yeah, I remember that happening too. And there are also those players out there who will, if you kill off their character, they'll just make the exact same character again. And again, I don't think you really can stop that from happening.
No, it's the Oktoberfest joke where it's like, I'm the same guy. By the way, in honor of my brother who died, and I'm his twin brother, call me his name. And I know detailed memory, like notes about all of you, so it's just going to act like he never went away. Right.
And I'd be less likely to kill off a player character if I knew that about that player. Like, I'm like, if you're just going to create the same character, I'm just going to try to keep you, I will do my best, like, without bending too many rules to keep you alive. But if you die, you die. Then we just have to deal with it. Because again, I'm also a fan of, like, I'm okay with character death.
Yeah, and again, so it's ultimately up like just having that conversation and respecting each other and being willing to like give in both ways. I think that's really what's important for sure.
Really listening to your players. So next thing I have is meaningful death versus gratuitous death. So, in my mind, death should be meaningful and should never be gratuitous. But what are your thoughts on that?
No, I agree. Again, this is because we're story-focused people. Like, we do enjoy the crunchy side of mechanics, me especially, where, like, being able to make an optimized character. But from a story perspective, if the character death doesn't mean anything, it's like, what is even the point of the game we're playing, right? Yeah. Like we talked about, like you can, like, if you go into a meat grinder, you should know you're going into a meat grinder. You should be like, the intent of this game is that your characters are going to die or they have a high chance of dying. Yeah. And so then the fun part from that is like, well, then let me make a character that I think won't die. Right. But you know it going in advance. Right. Gratuitous death to me is just like I killed your first character. Oh, I'm going to kill your second character. Okay, now I'm going to kill your third character. Okay, now I'm going to... It's like, what? Why? Yeah. So, like, in the campaign where I killed 3 of Zach's characters, the first one was my first ever character death that I did as a GM. And it was because the, like, villain they were fighting did max damage and was enough to kill his character outright. And so that sucked. What was funny is the players then eventually had a wish spell that they could fix, and instead of bringing his character back from the dead, he got his sword that turned him evil.
Yeah, it's always a fun option, is having the now your character's evil.
The second one, I think his second death in hindsight was a little harsh, because it was like a character like basically made a bomb outside their door because he was being a jerk. The third character death happened literally the same session he was introduced, and to be fair on that one, he gave me the backstory of, I am the last of my race. The villain who's sitting over there killed my entire race. And I'm like, got it. Okay. So just know there's a chance you could run it into him. Okay. Got it. And just know if you're in the form that is that, he's going to think the job wasn't done. Okay, he's going to murder you now. It's like, wait, why is he murdering me? And so I'm like, and then he eventually made a new character that actually ended up being like his permanent character for the rest of the campaign. Super thematic. He made it where he's like, well, this character wants revenge against that old character. He hates the guy who just killed him. And then there was a moment where he tried to kill himself, but because he had a magic item that cast Featherfall on him, he was able to kill the villain, but not him. And he was like, no, I wanted to die. But then he had a character growth where he's like, okay, well, because of this moment where my character wanted to die, he's now a pacifist, surprisingly, who still uses guns. He just uses rubber bullets because D&D.
Because D&D.
But yeah, I think you need to have meaning in your death to some extent. Even if the meaning is, look how fragile we are. Like if a bunch of goblins kill a player, I think it's okay if it like is meaningful to the other characters, right? Where it's like, wow, we lost this guy. How tragic, right? Like in Critical Role Campaign 2, they lost their first permanent character, even though they brought him back later. Eventually, I think we should talk about Molly Mock, but I have opinions on that. Anyway, if you want to know our controversial Critical Role opinions, let us know in the comments.
Maybe we'll do a video on it.
But yeah, he dies fighting like these generic like slavers, basically, and like these imprisoners. And it's like, they're not meant, you could tell they weren't meant to be super big villains. Like they were going to be mini arc villains. Like you fight them for the arc and then they're dead. But because they killed one of the PCs, that villain has like more gravitas. So now taking him down is even more impactful. And there is something about that where it's like, you killed our friend. Sure, you're just going to be like, you're not even important in the grand scheme of things. We're only level 4. But we took it really personally. And now we're going to kill you. I think there's something to be said about that.
Player intent and GM intent go a lot into that too. Like what are your plans again when it comes to creating your characters? And like, again, I think knowing who you're playing with and not taking death personal, that's a big thing too. I think that's a big thing for players to understand, is that don't take it personal, because 9 times out of 10 it's a dice roll thing, you know. And that's a made-up statistic, but
and I will say, in the situations where it's about the consequences of your players' actions, you need to telegraph that as a GM. So, like with Jeffrey, I told him, I'm like, in character, the guy said, "I'm not here to hurt you. Don't make me hurt you. Like, I'm not here to harm, but don't make me hurt you. I can do it." And then Jeffrey's like, "We're gonna attack him." I'm like, "Jeffrey, so you know, this could end badly." And he's like, "I don't care." And I'm like, "Okay." And then in one instant, Jeffrey lost his character. And I'm like, I telegraphed it like pretty far in advance. I do think that's where like 5th edition's death and dying rules are a little lame, is the fact that like it doesn't telegraph well. Like you go unconscious, but then like you don't get to do anything, and it's I don't know. There's some games where like Pathfinder does it better, where like you go unconscious. You like when you go to 0, you actually are like wounded and you're like still trying to hobble and like fight alongside it. But like, like, oh man, I'm close to death. It's up to me now. Do I risk it and still keep pushing on knowing that I'm closer to death? Or do I back away and try to like heal up and make this work better for me? Systems that are like can give you a forewarning of like, you have entered the dying phase. Recognize you are going to die if you continue pushing forward. That is your own risk. I really love games. I think Daggerheart does this, where if your character's dying, you get to choose. Are you going to try to risk, like there's a 50% chance you succeed and you come back? There is the, you lose a resource, but you come back. Or your character's going to die, but you go out in a blaze of glory. And I really like that kind of a mechanic where it's like, all right, I am choosing to let my character die, but I get a benefit to it.
Yeah, you give the player some autonomy over their character. Yeah, I like that. So let's talk about some games that don't have character death. So if you don't like death, maybe here are some games we could talk about.
Yes.
Yes. So yeah,
I would say Star Wars technically doesn't have character death.
It's really hard to kill. Trust me. Okay. I am on my second character. Well, I think we're done with the campaign now.
Right,
I think
right.
we decided to close it off. But I was on my second character who was close to death. But it
took so long.
It took so long. Even like if you have such a severe injury, it's amazing how long it takes you to die in this game.
Which is funny considering, well, actually somewhat fitting for Star Wars now that like every character keeps coming back except Qui-Gon Jinn. Qui-Gon Jinn's the only one who dies from one lightsaber staff.
He's the Uncle Ben. He's the Uncle Ben of Star Wars.
I mean, but that's the thing is, here's how you know if a system wants your characters to die a lot or not, is how easy is it for your character to die in the system. D&D, I would say it's like not super difficult. So like they want death to be meaningful. Star Wars, it's a chore because you have to get a specific critical injury to die. But in order to even get to that point, you have to have 5 critical injuries to even have a chance of rolling that kind of critical injury, which really means you need like 6 or 7 to make it really impactful. And so the idea, I think, is that you're supposed to do that over the course of the game, or you use the special crit rules that allow you to inflict a critical injury even if you don't get the character down. But ultimately what that is to say is Star Wars is the kind of game where like if your character dies, it's because they haven't done enough to heal themselves in between combats.
Correct.
And so it's more that like it was because your players weren't healing themselves enough, more so than it was like bad dice rolls or something like that.
I mean, and sometimes it can be bad dice roll. Because in order to heal yourself, you have to roll a certain thing certain thing, and when you're rolling it against yourself, you're at a disadvantage too. So, so if someone's not good and proficient at medicine, or if you don't have the resources to heal your character, it's really hard to get rid of those critical injuries. And if you keep it on there, it can eventually kill you.
Right.
But there are games also like Kids on Bikes.
Right, you don't die in that.
Unless you kind of have to have that choice. Yeah, because I think if I recall from the book, I think it says you can do it, but again, that's not an important mechanic. There's not because there's not a health system or whatever. If you're killing people off in that game, it is because you've hopefully talked to your players about it and let them know like, hey, here's the mechanic I'm doing, because you probably have added a mechanic to it.
Right, and then there's also some games where like, if you get unconscious, like you get knocked out of the scene, and that is all that happens to you. I think Avatar does that, where like you can't die in it, which makes sense. Avatar is definitely more of a game where it's like we're not killing anybody unless it's like super plot relevant. And really, I can't think of any characters in Avatar that die. And Jet. Jet's the only one who dies, but he dies off screen, and he's not one of the important characters.
Yes,
and so like that's the whole point, is that like, okay, you get knocked out of the scene, and then like, as a GM, you could introduce dying rules if you wanted, just like how in games that have dying rules, you could just take those away. Like, again, you fall unconscious, you're just out of the scene. And then you have to figure out, like, well, what happens if the whole party falls unconscious? Is like, well, the villain kidnaps you, right? That's another thing, too. You can have situations where your players all die, but it actually is just the start of a new thing. So going back to not my first ever TPK, unfortunately. My first ever TPK led to a devil god taking over my entire world. My second TPK was also a different thing. I had a TPK in the first session. And it was because I just kept throwing too many iced zombies at them, and they were too strong. It was poor encounter design on my part, 100%. First character dies, and I'm like, okay, that sucks, but hey, that's cool. Maybe it'll bond this party together, and they'll have a important reason. Second character goes down and dies, and I'm like, crap. Like, I don't want that. But then, suddenly, out of nowhere, the cleric's like, my God, will you help us? Please help us. In my head, I already knew I had a plot twist down the road of the God's not who he thinks it is. Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, oh, great. That's yes. Exactly. And so in that moment, I'm like, I can kill all these players. And so what happens is they instead wake up in pools of blood. Like, they all died, but they wake up in a new environment, pools of blood surrounding them, and they don't know what just happened. Did they die? Are they not sure? Well, we'll find out next session. And so death wasn't the end. They're now in service to this evil god who's like, you will not serve me. You all died. You would be dead if it was not for me. These other gods forsaken you, but I have not. Are you going to serve me now? And then we got to do a really fun, cool system of like XP grinding where they were able to wreck that XP system really quickly. So we didn't do it again.
Well, there you go.
It allowed it to where like, okay, cool. Instead of death being what happens, they got imprisoned, or now they're under the service of this new entity and they have to follow the entity. And that's the new arc. Maybe it's how do they get out of the service of that entity for a little bit before they go back to doing what they need to do. Yeah. And you can still have consequences of them dying where like the thing they were going to do is now delayed. Maybe they were going to stop a war from happening and they died before that happened. Now the war has started, but they're too busy, making sure that this evil thing, like this portal's closed so that way no one else can happen to die the way they did or something like that. There's a lot of ways you can mitigate death even in a system that has death.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, let us know about how you feel about death. Mm-hmm. Is this something you incorporate in your game? Is it something you try to avoid? Tell us in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, do all that good stuff.
Yes, and again, tell us if there's any videos you want to watch, any things. Yeah. Because whatever you like is what we like, because it gives us the views.
The views.
Anyway, Charles, please drink this. It's not poisoned. Now I control the podcast. Stay witty.